The greatest generation, the silent generation, baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Zs, and Gen Alphas recently.
Why does Gen Y get a fancy name, millennials? Why doesn't Gen X and Gen Z get a fancy name?
I don't know, but I like to believe at Gen X, they kind of stopped caring about the generation names. And when Gen Y came, we cared too much. So we decided we wanted something fancier. So we went in for millennials.
And millennials doesn't even make sense because it stops at 1997.
Yeah, I was going to say millennials, it should be 2000. I guess they expected us to go to 2000, but then a sudden change happened right around 1997. And they said, no, we've had enough of these.
Soorya was born. Suddenly, there's a whole generation shift when he was
Exactly.
born.
As soon as I was born, they said, okay, anything after is the next generation.
Before Soorya and after Soorya.
Exactly. That's how I like to see it. You were the start of the next generation.
Yeah, so I was born in 98, and I think I identify more with Gen Zs.
I was
honestly.
born for this video. I was born in 1997, and I identify more with the millennials. But in genuinely also, I was born in 1997, just for the audience.
So Gen Zs might have been the first generation that grew up with the internet. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of information that they just get exposed to. The
Just-
first serious social media I got on was Instagram.
Yeah, see, I think that could be a reason for, because Insta has a lot more, what do you say, has a lot more distractions versus Facebook, you had to read a lot more stuff.
You had to
Instagram's more
read.
pictures,
Exactly.
When people posted something on social media, many times it was just a status, right? Got engaged. The post would literally say got engaged.
In a relationship.
In a relationship, going to school. Versus nowadays on Instagram, when people get engaged, they post 10 pictures and you scroll through those pictures.
Picture is worth 1,000 words.
Exactly. And then they write another 1,000 words on top of that. Yeah.
Do you think technology is the reason why there's such a stark differences between generations?
Not just electronics technology.
Not just
different
electronics.
things.
I mean,
yeah.
technology as in the Industrial Revolution is technology.
Yeah, 100%. It's because things keep changing, things keep moving forward, and that's why there are different generations.
So the silent generation, right before the baby boomers, they were called silent generation because of the war, and they were trying to keep their low profile. They didn't want to be called out as communists because of having some weird thought about political whatever. So after the war ended, World War II, they decided to go and party, do psychedelics, and reproduce. So they were the ones who gave birth to the baby boomers because they had a lot of babies.
Yeah.
And now the next generation is called baby boomers.
Right. Yeah. Lastly, the first generation we started off with, which is early 1900s, was called the greatest generation.
Why are they called the greatest generation?
They're called the greatest generation because they had drastic improvements to the economically
and military. I guess the World War I happened, so
yeah. And I mean, you can easily see the differences between these generations because when you talk to your grandparents, it's still, I feel you change yourself or you behave a little bit differently so you can understand what they're saying or they can understand what you're saying. Do you do that? Do you notice that?
It's actually so cool because when I do talk to my grandmother, it's crazy to think that she was alive during World War II.
I know.
Stuff that you read in history books, and then you can just she lived it.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But do you think there's a lag in terms of technology wise I mean, when you grew up in India, technology wasn't as widespread. For example, internet, I guess, wasn't as widespread there.
No, I mean,
was there a lag in generational significance?
I personally felt it. I don't know about other people. Some of my friends say they didn't feel any of that stuff, but I personally felt it because one, I did grow up in a town compared to a city, and so there weren't too many other external factors. Or the internet was slower, or high-speed internet took so much longer for me to get rather than some other people in cities, right? A few years, that kind of stuff. So even though I was born 1997, which is kind of the cusp year for Gen Zs and millennials, I feel I can relate so much better to millennials, even if they're people who are 5, 6 years older than me are so much easier to relate to versus people who are 2, 3 years younger than me.
So what's interesting is there is a cultural gap between us because I grew up here, you grew up in
Yeah.
India. I think there's like a connection between cultural and generational. For example, my parents, they grew up in India, we migrated here. What I found very interesting is I've heard a lot that a lot of Indian immigrants who migrated here 20, 30 years ago, they have kind of a checkpoint of the generation or cultural significance of what India was back then.
Yeah, and they still think it's the same.
They still think it's the same.
No, yeah, I
So,
agree.
they're very strict on us here growing up. But then I hear the kids who grew up in India, they were so progressive, they got to do all this stuff. So it's very interesting because it seems like maybe now that India has progressed a lot more in technology.
100%. I mean, not just technologically, right? Everywhere. When I left India, I used to think, oh wow, this is going to be so much cooler. My friends are not going to have as much fun. But when I go back, they're having so much fun. If I'd chosen to stay in India, I would have had the same amount of fun, I wouldn't have been missing out on any of the tech stuff or any of the fancy stuff. It would have been a different lifestyle, but it would have been worth it. It's either ways. India's improving at a drastic pace, and it's so fun.
Why is it called Gen Alpha?
At Gen X, we kind of ran out of things to say.
We started the next letter, A.
Yeah.
And A is alpha.
Honestly, I feel like I invented Gen Alpha.
What do you mean? What do you mean you? What do you mean you? You went and wrote the Wikipedia page Gen Alpha?
I didn't do that, but I figured I had a feeling a few years back when Gen Z was ending, and I figured that Gen Zs, they were born with the internet. They've had their life.
They've had their life. They're done now. They're all grown up and they're done now.
They've had their inventions for their generations.
Oh,
but now there's AI and VR and all of these things coming in. So this is, I think, kind of sets the start for the next generation. That's what I was thinking. And I figured we were going XYZ and we ran out of things to say. And I did what any other person does in any other field. After Z comes alpha, because we ran out of letters. And 1 or 2 years later, alpha was actually a thing.
No, it's actually very interesting. You're identifying a significant technology shift here with AI. So you're thinking that the next generation can start now.
Yeah.
There's like a clear distinction between Gen Zs and Gen Alpha.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I wonder what's going to be after Alpha and what the key technological change that's going to happen then is going to be. I mean, it may not just be electronics like you said, right? It could be something else. It could be some biological gene editing.
Yeah, for sure. Those things could happen. What else do you think is different between the different generations? What is something that you think you are unable to relate to when it comes to millennials, even though you're so close in age to them? Like my problems. Do you have any?
Trying to think. My sister is a millennial. I think millennials are a little bit more serious than Gen Zs. I think it may be because that we have less things that we have to go through. For example, we didn't really go through a war. At least I haven't personally been affected by a war. I never fought in a war. None of my family members I know have fought in a war. But you can't really say the same with the other generations.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's the Vietnam War that some of my friends' parents or grandparents fought in. So a lot of these things that maybe influence them to be more serious. Maybe the pandemic might influence.
Honestly, I don't know how much Gen Zs will understand. Not you, but I mean the younger Gen Zs, the ones in high school. I don't know if they really understand. They're not really missing out on that much. I don't know. Let's say you're less than 5 years old. This pandemic, you're not even going to remember the pandemic.
I think there is a distinction between the older Zoomers and the younger Zoomers.
And there will be more mini divides in each generation.
I think this is a good place to stop. We talked about a lot of things in different generations and what makes them separated and what defines them.
Yeah. And if you guys like this one and are interested, you guys want us to talk about this more, feel free to leave a comment and we will. You've been listening to Soorya Ramesh.
And John Ravi.
And this is Two Brown Accents. We'll see you guys in the next one.
Bye bye.